Hi guys, welcome to another video tutorial intro in which I welcome you to the video tutorial because apparently I cannot think of anything more original to say. Today we're going to talk about drawing the human head and its basic structure and proportions. The video is going to be divided into four different parts. In the first part, we're going to go over the really basic structure and the building blocks. In part 2, we're going to go over the basic proportions of the face and all the different measurements and guidelines that I don't normally use in my art, but maybe if I did, my drawings would have been better. Part 3 is going to be... 3, is that how I do a 3? I'm gonna do it like this. Okay. Part 3 is going to be a long demo in which I'm going to show you how I draw the human head in front, side and 3/4 views, but this time I'm going to show you my personal approach, which doesn't really include all of those measurements, but it's a little bit more freestyle, so to speak. I'm still going to explain the proportions, but I will just show you how I do it. And the last part is going to be an exercise that will help you learn how to structure the head and how to draw it from different angles. Alright, let's just start drawing now because I guess I'm better at drawing than I am at speaking. That is not true. That is not true at all, but we're just gonna pretend that it's true for the purpose of this video. Alright? Keep watching! In this first part of the video, we're going to start with the general structure of the head and how to build it. So I start out with a circle and I draw a horizontal line, which is going to be the eyebrow line. And depending on where you place it on the circle is going to determine whether the person is looking up or down. The next thing that I do is I carve out a piece of the side of the sphere to separate the front planes of the face. I am drawing this line from the middle of this little circle that now appeared down to the chin. And after that, I am drawing the jawline. So to do that, I just extend this vertical line in the middle of the little circle that we have on the side, and then I connect it to the chin. Next, I draw another horizontal line wrapping around the volume, and it's going to be at the level of the bottom of this circle on the side of the head. And this line is going to indicate the bottom of the nose. Next, I add the eyebrows and also the nose. I am not concerned with anatomy here, so I am just drawing a simple box for the nose. And notice the little rectangular shape between the eyebrows and the nose. This is going to help you a lot with building the structure of the face, so keep it in mind. And if you divide the distance between the eyebrows and the bottom of the nose in half, this is where the bottom of the eye sockets would be. And as we said, we're not going to go into too much detail here, so I am just drawing these simple geometrical shapes for the eye sockets. When placing the ear, keep in mind that the tip of the ear is not going to extend above the eyebrow line. If you look at the little circle on the side of the head that we now have, in the bottom right quarter of the circle, we are going to place the ear. And it's also not going to extend any further down from the line of the nose, which pretty much means that the nose is as long as the ear, and you can even try it out on your own face to see that this is how it works. And lastly, I'm adding the mouth. So a general rule is that the mouth will not be placed in the middle between the chin and the nose, but instead 2/3 up. So you have 1/3, then you have the mouth, and then you have 2/3 for the chin. And actually the last thing that I forgot to add is the hairline. So in this case, I'm going to make the forehead as tall as the nose. And now let's move on to the next part of the video in which we're going to talk about proportions. Once again, I start out with the sphere and I divide it in half horizontally. So as we said, this is going to be the line of the eyebrows. And in this case, I extend the chin a little bit, so I'm going to end up with 3 almost equal parts for the forehead, the nose, and then the chin. And here I am going to place the nose at the end of the sphere. I'm also making the top of the skull a little bit pointy because it's never completely round. It has its planes just as the face. And if you divide the distance between the eyebrow and the nose into 3 equal parts, at the top part, this line is going to determine the middle of the eyes. And also remember that the ears are going to be as long as the nose, and the mouth, as we mentioned before, is not going to be placed in the middle from the chin to the nose, but instead 1/3 down from the nose. Now I'm indicating the nose and also marking down the eyebrows. One really important measurement that probably all of you know already is that the distance between the eyes is the length of one eye, and also the width of the nose is going to be the same. And you can see here how I'm drawing the eye on top of this line that I mentioned earlier. And when you're drawing the eyes, don't forget to also draw the eyelids as well. And a small tip that I can give you is that you don't have to connect all of the lines. As you can see, the bottom eyelids in the inner corners, I'm not really connecting the line there because I don't need to. I'm also indicating slightly the bottom plane of the nose because it adds more dimension. And I'm darkening a little bit the corners of the mouth because this adds a little bit more dimension to the drawing. And of course, the lips can be positioned very differently on the face depending on the person, but this is just kind of the general rule that they have to be placed at 1/3, not in the middle. And of course, the lips can have many different shapes and sizes and also positions. You can place them really high, you can place them really low. You can also even place them in the middle. It's just not really that common, I suppose. This head is a little bit more semi-realistic, I would say, just because of some small minor details. But for the next one in side view, I'm going to focus on the real human proportions, so you're going to see how those work. The last thing that I'm drawing are those two vertical lines from the corners of the eyebrows up. So these pretty much indicate where the front plane of the face is and where the side planes begin. So it kind of helps to imagine the face as a little box. So you have the front side and then the sides. And continuing down, I go around the eyebrows and I go around the eye sockets actually. I really encourage you to actually touch your own face and follow this line that you see on the screen. And this line can be really characteristic for each person and really different, so it can add a lot of personality. You can also use it in character design because it's a really great tool to add more diversity to the faces and just experiment with different designs. But in this case, I'm using it to indicate the side planes of the head, as we said, and it's really helpful, and I actually always draw that because it helps to add a lot of volume to the drawing. For the side view, once again, I begin with the circle, and then I place another circle in the middle, the one we cut off from the side of the head, if you remember from the previous exercise. Now, once again, the horizontal line will be the one for the eyebrows. And I'm also drawing a vertical one for the front of the face. Now you can also curve that line a little bit. If you look at different pictures of people, you're going to notice that the side view of every person can be really different. And sometimes the bottom side of the head will come forward a lot more, or other times it's going to be quite flat. There's a lot of diversity in that, but here I'm just going to keep it relatively straight. Now from the middle of the small circle on the head, I'm going to extend a line down and then connect it to the chin. So this is going to be the jawline of the person. But be careful not to make the chin super pointy because it does have a little bit of an edge at the bottom. And now from the bottom of the circle, the small circle, I am drawing a horizontal line, which is going to be the tip of the nose. One thing that I often notice beginner artists neglect is the part under the jawline. They just completely ignore that. And of course, in some really pushed cartoony drawings, that's okay, and I've done it too. But if you're drawing something more realistic, you have to account for the fact that under the jawline, there are things going on. There is your tongue, parts of your throat, and all that. So you have to draw this fleshy part, and just don't forget about it. I usually draw that as a completely horizontal line in side view. And of course you will notice that if someone is a little bit more overweight or also an older person, this line will not really be horizontal because they will have maybe a double chin, more fat there, or just saggy skin. I'm also very lightly indicating the sternocleidomastoid muscle. I don't know if this is how you pronounce it, but this is the muscle that is connecting from behind your ear and your jawline down to your collarbones. And again, I encourage you to touch your own neck and feel how this muscle works and moves around your neck. If you remember in the beginning of this video, I mentioned a little rectangle between the eyebrows, which helps to draw the eye sockets. And this area can be really different also depending on the race of the person. I believe in white people it's more pronounced, and especially in white males it can be really characteristic for certain people. So I make sure that I draw this shape going in and then the nose goes out of the skull. And pay attention to the lips in side view because they will almost never be on the same plane. Usually the front lip is going to come forward a little bit more than the bottom lip. And this is because if you actually look at a picture of the skull, you're going to see that the front teeth are covering the bottom teeth and the skin is just covering all of that, so it's normal that it's going to look the same. The eyebrows in side view can be a little bit tricky to draw, but I make sure that I maintain some of the curvature and I also keep them shorter because sometimes I see beginner artists especially just taking an eyebrow from front view and pretty much drawing it the same way in side view, which is not entirely true. It's not how it's supposed to look because this shape also has perspective, and when we see it in side view, some of it is going to be skewed a little bit. So it's going to appear a little bit shorter. Something to look for when analyzing reference pictures is how the eyebrows are always following the eye sockets. And again, if you touch your own eyebrows, you're going to feel that. We said before in the beginning of the video that if you divide the distance between the eyebrow and the nose in the middle, this is going to indicate the bottom of the eye socket. So here I draw a little line just as a small guideline for myself, and this is going to be the bottom of the eye. And the eye in side view kind of looks a little bit as a triangle, maybe with slightly rounded sides, not completely straight lines. And make sure you remember to also draw the eyelid and just imagine the eyeball and then the skin covering that on top. Now I'm drawing the hairline, but just know that this is something really individual for each person and there can be a lot of variety. Pretty much just like all the other facial features, of course, but especially in males, the hairline can be a little bit different. Sometimes if it's a slightly older person maybe, the hairline will be receding a little bit because males tend to lose a little bit of hair on the sides of their head. And then when drawing the backside of the hair at the neck, usually as a general rule of thumb, I like to end the hair kind of where the jawline begins. So it's at the same height as the corner of the jawline. And that's pretty much it for the general basic human proportions. In the next part of the video, I'm going to give you a little demo where I'm going to draw a bunch of heads, but this time I'm going to draw them in my own style and show you how I personally approach drawing the head without getting into too many measurements and guidelines, because this is not really my normal process. All of these measurements here, they were just to show you and explain how the human head works. But when I draw, I kind of eyeball things more, and I just want to show you what my process is. So let's move on to the next part. I'm starting the same way as I did with the more realistic heads. So just a circle divided in half vertically. In this case, I'm going to place the nose where the circle ends. I will try not to repeat myself too much, but things are pretty much the same, although here I'm going to maintain more of my own personal style and I'm not going to go for super realistic facial features and proportions of the head. I want to make this face look a little bit cuter, and to achieve that I am going to place the facial features lower on the face. And the reason for that is because we tend to associate that with babies' faces, and we are just biologically coded to love babies. If you look at a baby's head, pretty much half of it is just a forehead, and then the other half is everything else, all the facial features. So here I'm doing the same thing that I did in the earlier part of the video, but this time I'm exaggerating the facial features a little bit. So I am making the ears a little bit more pronounced and sticking out of the skull a little bit more. And I'm also making the top part of the skull a little bit pointier. I did that in the previous drawings too, but I like to exaggerate it in character design a little bit more. I want to avoid making the nose look too busy, so I'm just going to roughly indicate its volume. A mistake that I very often see in beginner artists' work is that when they are drawing the neck, they tend to draw it like this. I mean, this is really exaggerated, but you kind of get the point. They make it wider at the top part and narrower at the bottom part, and it works the opposite way actually. So you either just make them two vertical parallel lines if you're drawing something really pushed and exaggerated, or you make it a little bit narrower at the top part. So here you will have the trapezius muscle from the back, and then you have the shoulders. And this is the muscle that I mentioned earlier, the sternocleidomastoid. It is attaching to the collarbones, so the pit of the neck. And it looks something like this, really roughly. This is quite exaggerated. I mean, this girl will probably not be that muscular, but I just want you to get the point. And this muscle continues and attaches behind the jawline and the ear. It will just be something like this. Alright, moving on. If I'm drawing male characters, I will very often draw this line that I mentioned earlier, that is going around the eye sockets and the cheekbones, and then attaches to the sides of the chin. So obviously the face is really rounded, you know, something like this. It's not really a box, but I think it just helps to think of it this way. As you can tell now, this character is quite adult looking, and if I want to change that, if I want to make it a little bit cuter and more appealing, I will just do the thing that I mentioned in the beginning of this demo, which is I'm going to select the eyes and the eyebrows. I will just soften the selection a little bit with the feather and then move it down. So this is the moment where we stop following the proportions as they are by the book, and we start adding a little bit more personality and moving away from this generic look. And I want to extend the top portion of the head even more, because I just really want to emphasize this feeling. By the way, there is a storm outside. I don't know if you can hear it, but if you do, I hope it doesn't bother you. Okay, so it looks something like this, and the next thing that I'm going to do is, as you can see, this line here is pretty straight, but this is not how it actually works, because the ears are attaching in the middle of the head. So if this is the head in side view, the ear is going to be right here. So I want to add a little bit more depth. So I'm going to make the back side of the head a little bit wider. So this is just going to strengthen the perspective of the head. And also another thing to watch out for is that no matter how sleek the hair of your character is, it's never going to follow the skull of your character exactly. There's always going to be a little bit of volume. And if you're usually struggling with keeping the eyes the same and kind of even on the same plane, what I like to do is measure the position of the inner corners and also that of the outer corners of the eyes. So if those are at the same level, and if this level is the same as the tilt of the head, then you're good to go. So we said that the distance between the eyes is one eye, roughly. I'm not going to measure it, but it looks good to me. But also we said that the width of the nose is going to be the same. But when I'm doing cartoony drawings, obviously they have larger eyes, but I don't want to give them huge noses as well. So I'm going to kind of break this rule. And I'm going to make the nose narrower. And I'm also pushing it a little bit lower, closer to the lips. And a good practice when drawing the eyes of your character is to draw the iris and the pupil a little bit closer together. What I mean by that is, if these are the eyes of your character, I will not draw the iris in the middle, but instead I will draw it a little bit closer to the inner corner because it just looks cuter this way. I don't know why, but I've learned that from like books about drawing and also from practice. It just tends to make the character look a little bit more innocent almost. And I think it can be applied even more in more cartoony drawings. So here it's really subtle in the character that I'm drawing. But when I'm doing like really cartoony stuff, I like to exaggerate that a lot. I'm going to select the nose and the mouth and push them lower because I want to give her a smaller chin. And because we already lowered the entire face pretty much, like all the facial features, now the position of the ears is a little bit off. So I'm just going to select them and push them a bit lower. So now if you do the measurements, they pretty much align with the position of the eyebrows and the nose. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially now for this assignment. I mentioned that in the previous part, but watch out for the entire shape of the ear, because this is what happens if I just draw a random curved line. Because you know, when you look at an ear, it's kind of like this. It's just a smooth shape, but we want to add some sort of design to the shape. So this is what I do. It's kind of like a rectangle if you continue it. This is what it would look like, but I'm just omitting this part here. And then you have a really nice sense of design. And of course, it's important to study the ears and their anatomy as well, because they can be a little bit complicated. But when I'm doing character design, the ears don't really have any particular function, so I don't have to be too specific about the actual anatomy they have. Whereas I have to be with the mouth or the eyes, you know, because there are expressions and these features are important. But with the ears, it doesn't really work that way, so I can get away with something really simple and not entirely anatomically accurate. And I think we can just stop here. We're not going to talk about the individual facial features because it's a topic for another video, but this is how I draw faces. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do the other views as well. I'm just quickly going to go over the 3/4 view because things are pretty much the same here, the exact same measurements, just a slightly different angle. So again, I'm starting out with the circle and then adding the triangular shape at the bottom for the chin. I'm following the same measurements for the eyebrows and the nose. And as you can see, I'm just really roughly marking down where the facial features are going to be. With the 3/4 view, I tend to kind of readjust things a lot as I go, also using the liquify tool, which you've seen me use a lot always whatever I draw. For me, it's important to just have something on the canvas and then work from there, instead of just staring at the blank canvas and trying to determine where exactly to place something. I prefer to just put it somewhere. For example, the nose, I place it somewhere and then I continue with the rest of the drawing, and later on I decide, oh okay, maybe I need to push the nose a little bit lower, it's going to look better. For me personally, this approach works way better. So as you can see, I'm still using some of the guidelines from the proportions in the beginning of the video, but I'm not really going crazy with measuring every single thing and its placement. So when drawing the eyes, for example, I know that the bottom part of the lower eyelid has to fit somewhere in the middle between the nose and the eyebrows. Of course, this can vary a lot depending on the person, but in general, this is kind of where you're going to place the eyes. And I'm also not going for any likeness here. This is not the same character as the front view, because then my approach would be slightly different. I will kind of measure things a little bit more because I will want to make sure that the proportions of the face are exactly the same, because I want to maintain the likeness. But here, this is not my intention at all. So I'm pushing in the chin a little bit, and I will push it even further later, because right now it's sticking forward a little bit too much. And notice when I'm drawing the neck with such cartoony characters, slightly more exaggerated, the neck doesn't really touch the ear, because in a normal realistic human head, this is going to happen. You're going to see the backside of the skull behind the ear continuing down to the neck, but with more pushed drawings, I want the neck to be slimmer and then the head a little bit bigger, so it kind of works in a slightly different way. I tend to keep the noses of my characters a little bit more simplified because I think it works better in this more cartoony style. So I'm kind of omitting a lot of detail at the nose bridge, and I just keep the entire line of the nose as a simple curve. Also notice these two lines, the one that indicates the back of the skull and the one where the jawline starts at the ear. Notice that these two lines are not at the same level. So the back of the skull goes a little bit more to the right, the screen right. And this is because you have to think about it as a volume, not as a 2D shape. And I'm making the ear slightly bigger because I want to emphasize it and again strengthen the design feeling. And I'm also slightly indicating the ear at the other side of the character because it's sticking out of the head a little bit, so I think it might be visible from this angle. For the eyes, once again, I make sure that the inner and outer corners of the eyes are at the same level, roughly. And I also keep in mind that it doesn't have to be a perfectly straight line if I decide to measure that, but instead it's going to curve a little bit with the entire head. And also a small detail that you need to incorporate in your drawings is the hair in front of the ear, the small triangular piece right next to the eyebrow, because if you touch your own hair, you will notice that it goes down in front of the ear a little bit and then it goes behind. Otherwise, it kind of looks as if your character is wearing a wig or something like that. And I also think that this overlap of the top part of the hair going behind the ear and then this tiny little piece showing underneath, I think this adds a lot of volume and depth to the drawing. Just because you have two different layers that are overlapping, and as we've said in previous tutorials, overlap is something that really helps to add volume to the drawing. And the last thing that you need to watch out for is the nostril that is not facing the camera but is on the other side. So in this case, it's the screen left side of the nose. And you need to draw that because especially when you have a nose that is so turned up and curved, you are still going to see a small part of the nostril that is not close to the camera but is on the other side. It's just how perspective works. So always pay attention to that because it's a mistake that I really often see and it can be really easily avoided. For the side view of the head, I start out again in the same way. But one thing that I like to do in character design is I like to push the bottom part of the head a little bit forward. So that will be the tip of the nose and then the mouth. The entire jawline just extends forward a little bit. This allows me to add a really nice curvature to the nose, so that's why I like to do it. And it also breaks the silhouette a little bit and adds more of a design sense. As you can see, I start out really simple, so initially I grouped the entire shape of the nose and the mouth as just a simple straight line, but now I'm starting to carve out a little bit of those volumes and I'm trying to add the nose, and later on I'm also going to kind of define the lip shape as well. Once again, the bottom of the eyes is going to fall kind of in the middle between the nose and the eyebrow. I know I'm repeating this, but I do it intentionally because I think it will help you remember things more. And also notice something that we mentioned earlier, that the eyebrow in side view is going to be a little bit shorter than it is in front view. So it's not exactly the same shape because it also has perspective and it's curving around the volume of the skull. And for the eye in side view, again, it's a simple triangular shape. And one thing that is super important to note here is that the eye is at an angle. So the front side of the eye is not a completely vertical line, but instead it's slightly diagonal, with the bottom part going in a little bit. And don't forget to also draw the top eyelid. So as we said, imagine the eyeball and then the skin wrapping around that on top and also at the bottom. I'm going to draw that a little bit later. And also when I'm drawing the eyelashes, they go a little bit behind the eyeball, because if you imagine again the actual sphere and you imagine the eyelid wrapping around the sphere, then in side view, the eyelashes are going to go a little bit behind the eyeball because they're curving around it. I don't know if I explained it very well, but just keep it in mind. And with the lips, once again, the top lip goes a little bit more forward than the bottom one. They are not at the same level. It's kind of like this angular diagonal line that if you draw from the tip of the nose to the bottom of the chin, you're going to notice that it's not completely vertical, but it's slightly angled. So everything is receding a little bit. And of course, you can have a lot of variety there because everyone has a different side view and profile. But usually everything is just following this line that is slightly angled. And remember this little shape that I told you in the beginning between the eyebrows and the nose bridge? I'm really exaggerating this shape here because I think it can help to add a lot of design to the drawing instead of keeping it really simple and generic. I avoid keeping the skull completely round, following the circle that we initially began with, because actually the skull, as we said, it has its own shape, it has its planes, so it's not just this completely curved shape. And I like to keep it relatively straight in side view at the top part, and then I have these two lines, one for the back and one going down connecting to the neck. I think by being more concrete with these shapes and lines, I can once again add more design to my drawing. And another thing that I already mentioned, but I am going to repeat here, is to watch out for the hair because it has volume and it's going to extend outside of the shape of the skull a little bit. So essentially the head is going to look slightly bigger because of all the hair that is covering it. And this is especially important at the bangs because you have to show that the hair is wrapping around the forehead instead of just covering it really tightly. And notice with the jawline, I am not keeping this really sharp and dark line because it's going to look a little bit strange because as we said, there is a little bit of flesh under the jawline that is connecting to the neck. So the jawline is not actually that sharp. In some people it is, but not in everyone. So I like to keep this line a little bit softer there. And I'm also softening the chin a little bit, so I'm pushing it back even more. Again, this can be really specific depending on the person, but I think in this case it looks kind of cute. And notice that I have two planes, one that is beginning from the bottom part of the bottom lip, and then suddenly it becomes the chin. So you can also touch your own chin and you're going to notice that you have this indent area there right under your bottom lip. With some people it's more pronounced, for example mine is really pronounced. With others it's relatively straight. But it's one more thing to watch out for because it can add a lot of diversity to your characters. And I think this is it. This is how I approach drawing the human head. Not too many measurements, but still keeping some basic proportions in mind. And also tweaking stuff where I want to exaggerate and push my designs, especially for more cartoony drawings. And now let's proceed to the last part of the video, in which I'm going to show you an exercise. This exercise is based on Andre Loomis's method for drawing the human head, so if you want to learn more you can check out his books. I'm not really following it 100%, but I am taking the things that I find most important. There's not much to be said really for this exercise, it's just that I am constructing the human head with basic geometric shapes. I'm keeping it relatively simple, only indicating the eye sockets, the shape of the nose, and also the shape of the teeth on the skull, so this circular shape where the mouth is going to be placed. If you want to practice this exercise yourself, I would advise you to find some different reference pictures of human heads in different angles and try to match the angle of the picture in your drawing. If you find it really difficult and you cannot really decipher what is going on, I would suggest that you draw on top of the pictures first. Try to find the circle, the sphere that we always begin with, and then connect the jawline, and from there try to identify where the different features are going to be and what they're going to look like when simplified to basic geometric shapes. And after you're finished doing that, turn that off and try to draw again on the side, the face, but now with this new understanding that you have of the structure. If you still find it a little bit too difficult, you can keep on the layer of your overpaint, but maybe put it on the side so you can reference both that and the picture. And based on those two things, try to construct the human head. And a really important thing is that in the beginning, it's not going to look good. So just accept that and begin this exercise with the intention that it's going to be ugly and it's going to be wrong. But try to accept that mistakes are really necessary in this case because they are what's going to teach you. If you do something right from the first try, this only goes to show that you already know how to do that thing and you're not really learning anything new. So if you're struggling, if you're making mistakes and redoing things 1,000 times, that means you're on the right path because you're learning to do something that you don't know. So that's the entire purpose. I didn't really go over drawing the human head from different angles too much in this video because I really wanted to focus on the proportions and the structure, and I think I will make a separate video about drawing the head from extreme angles. Now I'm gonna leave you with the rest of this time-lapse where I'm doing some studies, and I hope it will maybe inspire you to do some studies yourself, or it's going to be helpful to follow my process, and I'm going to talk to you in the next video. Okay, bye bye! open. Try again.